come to the bold analysis. Ndindi Nyoro Ruto scheme is a long range that will explode with the time. And because I am fully convinced that political fence sitting 15 months to the general election cannot be understood or cannot be perceived as political independence. And exclusively in this podcast, amidst the reports of Ndindi Nyoro meetings with Oscar Sudi, we advance different theories as to why the deal between Ruto and Ndindi Nyoro. Something is happening there. It is just a matter of time. Even if it's not, if it doesn't play, and if it doesn't play now, it can play immediately after the 2027 general election. Kindly subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell and like our videos. And let me continue saying thank you very much for supporting us this September project. We had a different approach of supporting 4 students to go to school. We sorted 2, the boy who was in KMTC in Nairobi on Tuesday, and so I sent Kawira and the team. They were able to pay fees for the boy. And then the same day, they were also in Runyenjes to support the other girl who was also in Runyenjes, who was also there to support, just there to support and pay her fees. And they really did well. So tomorrow, my team will be in Kisumu to support the girl in Kisumu Polytechnic and the boy in Sigalagala Polytechnic in Kakamega. So we'll be in those 2 places. My team will be in those 2 places just to ensure that they sort out the other 2 students. But also on the sidelines, this weekend, we are going to bury Steve. Steve is the boy who was paralyzed. If most of you remember him, that boy suffered a mild malaria, went to ICU and passed on. And so my team and the whole team will be in Kisumu for that burial on Saturday. And that's why I'm also reaching out to you. We supported that boy when he was alive. So you can also just support us a token, just to support my team as we make our way there. And we can also leave a small, maybe Kinwa Mgongo, just for the family. And I've put the number there. You can reach out. And I believe that we are together all in this. Now, without much ado, let me get to the gist of this analysis. Ndindi Nyoro was William Ruto's blue-eye boy. Immediately after the 2022 general election, no one would even imagine that Ndindi Nyoro and William Ruto at some point would not speak the same language. But for you to take the perceived fallout as it is, probably you just need to look at it at a different lens. And from the report of this Sudi-Nyoro meeting is where I want us to draw some political observations. But just to give you a good basis, probably we need to start from here. You remember, before even Gen Z protest, Ndindi Nyoro was flying across the country, campaigning on what really disturbed Rigathi Gachagua, because according to Rigathi, by that time, who was with William Ruto, Ndindi Nyoro and the team were trying to inherit presidency from William Ruto. And just to know how these political cards were being played, this really disturbed Rigathi Gachagua. And from this point, you would understand how William Ruto really struggled or really put up his machinery to make sure that Mount Kenya unity is destroyed. But immediately after the finance bill, and things happened, at the time after the finance bill, of course there were several other plans. There were plans to impeach Rigathi Gachagua. The report was that by that time, William Ruto wanted Ndindi Nyoro to be the cabinet, to take over the Rigathi position. But of course, Mount Kenya oligarchs and veteran politicians advised Ndindi Nyoro against such a move, and Ruto settled on Kindiki. But since then, Nyoro, who even was out of the whole process to impeach Rigathi Gachagua, did not show up and actually was a bit uncomfortable, was seen to be uncomfortable with how things were moving, with how things were turning. So I need you to realize that after that, early this year, there was a meeting between Ndindi Nyoro, Babu Owino, and Josephat Nanok. And that meeting resulted into a perceived political party that was being formed. And I did analysis about that video here, because Babu and Nyoro even traveled to Narok to meet Nanok. And not Nanok. It's not just Fat Nanok. Is the guy who is in Yala, the guy who represents the disabled, Sankok. I've got it. And all was out that it was a political journey. But I remember when I did that analysis, I said that Babu Owino needed not to trust Ndindi Nyoro fully. Of course, that ticket was looking very good ticket, very promising one. But if Babu wanted to go for Nairobi governor, he really wanted to, he really had to tread very careful on how he was going to move. Because if it turned out that Ndindi Nyoro was actually pro-Ruto but was just being used to bring them, then it would backfire on the political future of Kina Babu Owino. I'm gladly informed that that party, while on its way to be formed, a last-minute trigger was pulled, and the Babu Owinos pulled out after realizing that there was a powerful government force that was behind the move that was had between Ndindi Nyoro and Sankok. So it died some natural death there. But even after that, a new wave, a new political seed germinated. This political seed, if you remember, now it is called Kenya Moja. It has Gathoni wa Mushomba, Babu Owino, the embattled Edwin Sifuna, the ODM SG, Caleb Amisi, Anthony Kibagendi, and of course others. One unique feature with all of them is that they are all in agreement that they don't want Ruto to get second term. Now, the sources within this coalition are saying that while they've tried to grab Ndindi Nyoro is hesitant of associating with any of these formations. And this is a youthful formation coming. Now, this begs the question, where does Ndindi Nyoro stand? Maybe if you have an answer, you can pause at this point and tell us, where does Ndindi Nyoro stand? You will, of course, at the end of this podcast, we're going to answer that question. Even today, I understand Safina Party, Paul Mwite, the founder of Safina Party, was handing over that party to Jimmy Wanjigi to lead the party. And they're trying to fashion it as the Gen Z party, that Safina Party. But of course, there have been attempts to get some of the political figures, and Ndindi Nyoro is not there. However, in what is perceived as probably a confusion, but a strategic one, Ndindi Nyoro speaks to the heart of this country heartily about the debt, the borrowing of the current regime. And I want you to listen to this. Then there is a question that maybe even if you don't answer it, but let it just ring in your mind. Who is Ndindi Nyoro addressing?
We can't talk politics. I just want to say one thing that is attached to the things I was saying, because I am an economist and I am grateful for that. There is one thing that is troubling my mind as a Kenyan on the economic front. And it's something, I am not saying it to accuse anyone. I'm saying it because it is important. If you read the central bank data, it shows that the Kenyan economy, we have now borrowed. Our national debt is now over 12.1 trillion Kenya shillings. For the last 3 years, our country has borrowed in excess of 3.5 trillion Kenya shillings. So I would want to request all of us as the leadership, and especially those who have the opportunity to make decisions in the executive. Let us serve our country with dedication. And let us not seek to give good narratives out there when the Kenyan economy is actually being teared down or torn down. We have borrowed over 3.5 trillion Kenya shillings in 3 years. President Kibaki borrowed 1.2 trillion in the entire 10 years he was president. And therefore we have borrowed 3 times in 3 years. We have borrowed 3 times what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. That's the money Kenya has borrowed in the last 3 years alone. 3 times what Kibaki borrowed in 10 years. And in that money, I have not included other debts that Kenya has now become clever to borrow in the name of something called securitization. I have not mentioned even that. It therefore means the economy of Kenya is borrowing 100 billion every month. And every single day, when the lights go off, every day, every single day, Kenya is borrowing 3.4 billion every day. That we are borrowing in a minute. You can do the calculations and see. In an hour, maybe we are borrowing around 137 every 1 hour. I'm saying this because we are now headed to the elections. And what governments do, they focus more on re-election, and we forget that we have a country to lead after the elections. And what that means is that every time we are nearing elections, we start having something called fiscal expansion. Because maybe there is nothing much to be seen for the past year, then in basically 1 year, we want everything to be seen. And therefore, what do? We become reckless in borrowing. Kenya is there now. That now our debt is 12 trillion Kenya shillings. I want to request that we do not have to put our country in that kind of pedestal in terms of borrowing. Kenya has always had development for the many years, but we never had to borrow that much. President Kibaki did a lot of development. He borrowed only 1.2 trillion for 10 years. Where is the 1.2 trillion we are borrowing every year going? To make the matter worse, anything you see with your mouth, with your eyes, sorry for that. Maybe the mouth is what is also being used somewhere. So I shouldn't say sorry. Let me paraphrase that. Everything you see with your eyes happening in Kenya now, in terms of development, what you can see, for example, the expansion of this Keno-Marwa road, is not even part of the 12 trillion borrowed. Is another loan on the side called fuel levy securitization. Everything else you see in Kenya in terms of development, like even the Talanta Stadium, is also not part of the 12 trillion debt. That is another debt, securitization of the sports fund, where we borrowed 46 billion and we'll be paying 100 billion in interest rate alone after 15 years. Even the expansion of Nairobi-Nakuru Road is also not part of the 12 trillion we have borrowed. That is NSSF money being used as a PPP to build that road. I request those who are in government, you have already borrowed 1.2 trillion every year. And even what we can see with our eyes is actually not part of that borrowing. Please kueni na huruma ya nchi ya Kenya. Even as we preside over the affairs of our country, let us be, tujue kwa akili zetu ya kwamba there is Kenya after elections. Let us not run our country in terms of overheating it. We must avoid to become like Sri Lanka. We must avoid to become like Ghana. We must avoid to become like Ethiopia. We must avoid to become like Zambia in the recent years. Because Kenya is a strong country with internal resources. This issue of profligate borrowing must come to an end if we really care about this country. Asanteni sana, Mungu awabariki.
Thank you. Let's give another round of applause to our chief guest. Asante sana. I'll kindly request Bwana Mheshimiwa to come back. Did Nyoro come back on stage here? I would like to present you something. And you'll also let me put your hat.
Now, let me tell you. In politics, you need the masses and you need the numbers. You will understand that the Kiharu Member of Parliament, the former Budget Appropriation Committee Chair, speaks to the middle class. Apart from the messaging out there that things are bad, that his message is half, and let me say half-baked. Because then someone would ask, yes, Nyoro, after saying that, so what next? Or what should you do? What should we do? The question of what should we do is not there. And that is why reports that Ndindi Nyoro have been meeting with Nyoro-Sudi in parliament precincts opens a Pandora box, or what exactly is actually the scheme. What the public, and one day might be vindicated, what the public sees as a revolt between Nyoro and President Ruto, probably it's not. Ruto, on that other end, is addressing his opponents and attacking everyone. Have you seen him attacking Ndindi Nyoro? Or have you seen his political lieutenants from Mount Kenya attacking Ndindi Nyoro? No. The Kiharu Member of Parliament has great investments in Kenya Power. There have been efforts to revisit others who are against government. His space is very intact. And I don't mean that I should glorify when such happens, but I'm mentioning it because those are perennial schemes that those in states always use when they want to attack the opponents. So, Ndindi Nyoro has been meeting Nyoro-Sudi. Guys, before I even give up, I even give on my take. What do you think is at the center of this plan? What exactly could be is being planned? Maybe also want to listen from you. It cannot be far away from this. Nyoro has been planted strategically to harvest the middle class, and this middle class, let me tell you something with Politics 001, because I want to answer the question of harvesting middle class. Politics 001 is to make sure that the voter is disorganized. No one wants an organized voter. Let me tell you, you see, even these political parties, UDA, ODM, DCP, all that, they're supposed to disorganize your mind, to have some line of thinking that 6 P's. It doesn't matter what the governor has done. It doesn't matter what the MP has done. It doesn't matter what the MC have done. We are voting ODM. We are voting DCP. We are voting UDA. We are voting Wiper. So all that, even this Gen Z, you see these lucrative deals happening there. I see some podcasts. I normally watch some podcasts and I see this one is NIS one. So Nyoro is that candidate talking to the middle class that the fellows in executive are borrowing, and maybe tomorrow we will not have the vote. Maybe at an appropriate time, Nyoro would point at himself and say, I've been talking about this and I think it should be done this way. What do I mean? I mean, Nyoro can be a presidential candidate. And while someone will look at it from the Mount Kenya perspective, and that's why you saw Rigathi talking about it, in real sense, he's supposed to harvest some people in the middle class there. But you need to know, those people are not so many. No, not there, they are many. But they are not the voting mass. So if you are harvested, already you've taken a chunk from the masses. That could be my theory number one, and I might be wrong. And I also want you to get to me on this. Then the third leader I'm looking at is Ruto is posturing Nyoro beyond 2027. Probably his person is Nyoro. This could be it. Not to vie for Kiharu MP seat, or even vie, but let me advance the presidency. Nyoro to go for the seat, president or running mate somewhere, lose that seat, brought back to power if Ruto gets it, and then get a cabinet slot probably, and groomed and try to revive the former Kalenjin Kikuyu matrix and propel Ruto to power and propel Nyoro to power as Ruto's successor. In that end, you've locked out Kina Mudavadi, you've locked out Kina Raila, and maybe. So he knows that the country is looking for a solution. But I need to say this. Do you think this country needs economists? If you get an economist, it's going to be solved. A lot have been said about Kibaki. Kibaki was an economist. But the credit of what Kibaki achieved, it's not because entirely he was an economist. It is just because Kibaki ensured that his system was working. Even at the time he wanted to stay on power, to cling on power against the will of the people, it is his system that maintained him there. So, I see this as something beyond 2027. Lastly, maybe somewhere, a weird thought. Will Ruto be looking at the former Kiharu member of parliament, not the former, the current Kiharu member of parliament, as a potential person to be his running mate in 2027? Don't say it's impossible. It's just a matter of putting Kindiki and Ndindi Nyoro in the ballot and make people elect. And if you want Nyoro, you go the way he did to Rigathi. He wanted Kindiki, but he knew Rigathi was going to be a powerhouse, so he sent them to some nomination, while knowing he has whispered to all those MPs the person he wants to be his deputy. You do that and whisper to all those people that I want Nyoro to be my deputy. Bring economists and this and that, and still. So on that, you can clearly see that there is more beyond what your lens is pointing at. Thank you.